West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Joining us now is Ehud Barak. He is the former Israeli general. He was the prime minister of Israel from 1999 to 2001. Mr. Barak, thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
I have spoken to a number of Israelis and a number of American avid supporters of Israel over the last few days, and I have never heard them as worried about the future of Israel. Where are you right now in terms of the democratic health of your country, and have you pulled back from the brink?
I think that there was a major victory for the protest movement against Netanyahu, basically coerce him into capitulating and stopping at the last moment what was defined by our Chief Justice Esther Chayut as not a judicial reform, but an explicit effort or attempt to crush the judicial system and the independence of the Supreme Court and push Israel outside of the family of democratic nations. So the whole public stood up, all leading group in all ways of life, and said up to here, and you described it very well, but the overall battle is not over. It's one-time major victory, and now some of the protesters might give him a pause, others, as you have described, won't give him a pause, and there are some negotiations opened in the office of the president of the state, Mr. Herzog, between different factions. The opposition was there today, probably the coalition will be tomorrow, and we will see. I'm confident we will win. Netanyahu won't be able to push Israel into a kind of status like Hungary under Orban or Poland under Kaczynski. We are too strong and too kind of aggressive.
Well, I mean, that's interesting that you say that. It's interesting you say that, Prime Minister Barak, because that's what everybody thinks, right? That's America also thinks we're too strong to be pushed into this kind of nonsense. And underlying what Netanyahu is doing, this is a guy you know, you've run against him, you've won against him. This is not the only problem. The judicial reform is not the only problem. He is the prime minister again because he has formed a coalition that is, and every time he gets elected, we say this, it's the most right-wing coalition in Israel's history. This is not where it begins or ends.
No, it didn't end yet, but it will end, I believe. You know, we have an empirical evidence that whenever a major protest force count more than 3.5% of the population. It's about 7 or 8% of the adult population, and tenaciously and kind of determinedly keep protesting. At the end of it, the government either capitulates or falls down. And that's what will happen in Israel as well. The government won't be able to continue this way, and Netanyahu lost a lot of his prestige. There is a free fall of his favorability among the people, and the majority of his own voters are against of what he's doing, and many people lost their trust that Netanyahu is still got the proper or the judgment and calibrated kind of attitude to the problem that the prime minister in Israel needs.
There's another issue going on, and that there's increased tensions with the Palestinians. There are provocations on both sides of this issue, but this Netanyahu government has not helped the situation in the way that it's been reacting. And there are a lot of Palestinians, because we've talked to a lot of them on this network, who say this is fantastic that all these Israelis came out and protested against judicial reforms, but there's still the problem of the Palestinians, and you don't see 500,000 Israelis taking to the streets to say, let's solve that problem. You tried when you were prime minister. This prime minister is not trying.
I think we have to put on the shelf for the time being the big elephants in the room. There is the one in regard to the Palestinians. There is another one about the relationship between religion and the state. There are gaps in the society. There are many main issues, but they have all been put on the shelf by now in order to make sure, first of all, that Israel will remain a democracy. So we join hands from all parts of the situation. You mentioned earlier the firing of the defense minister. The minister of defense, which is Israel, is the direct responsible to the armed forces. He demanded gathering of the cabinet in order to present to the cabinet what he sees as an immediate and apparent risk to the security of the nation. And that's something unheard of, that the prime minister did not respond it on the spot. And Netanyahu didn't let him to gather the cabinet, his cabinet, the prime minister's cabinet. And the reason was that the next morning there should be some vote in the Knesset where one of these crazy laws that he tries to pass in order to push Israel out of the democratic nation's family has to be decided. So basically, Netanyahu was afraid that if the ministers in the cabinet, which are members of the Knesset, will hear first year, will hear what the commander of the armed force, what the head of our intelligence, what the leaders of the defense establishment think about it, they might not join him in voting for his laws. So he closed it. And when the minister demanded and went out and told the public the truth, he fired him. That's something unheard of, and led many people, including Netanyahu supporters, to put a question mark about his judgment. We don't have constitution. We don't have the 25th Amendment, but these 500,000 people in the street, which is about more than 10% of adult population Israel, equivalent of Americans, probably 170 million. When these 500,000 are in the streets, it's because we don't have constitution, we don't have 25th Amendment, and people feel that that's what the fit step to take. And you see in the picture, we will win. The protest will ultimately win. Might take time.
All right.
I have ups and downs, but we won't lose the game.
We'll continue this conversation because we can't put the matter of the Palestinians on the shelf forever. So I'll invite you back and we'll continue that conversation.
Not forever, but for the time being. Urgency.
We'll have to discuss that because there are a whole lot of Palestinians who say this is the moment to talk about it. But thank you. I know you're up in the middle of the night for us, and I always appreciate your time. Ehud Barak is the former Prime Minister of Israel.
It is Wednesday, the 29th of March of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests? No one? No one will. Yep, apparently. Now this is what we have gotten on high. Apparently, no one can do anything about all this gun violence. Not a thing. It's just gotta happen. If you're homeschooling your kids, you probably have them a bit safer than, the hoi polloi that would dare send their kids to public school. Public school? Why don't you just give it to a charter? Oh my God, it wasn't a public school where they shot up the kids this time. It was at a Presbyterian elementary school. All right. Okay. So, can't do a thing. Well, I would probably advocate an idea that I think it's what is it now? It's called a red flag law. Some people called it the don't let the wife beater get a gun law. But there was a lot of wife beaters out there that apparently the Republicans needed to be able to, I don't know, wrest power from the rest of us. And they have. And then, you go into states where anybody can get a gun. They mean anybody. So you might have been adjudicated as someone who does not have the mental capacity to drive a car. Or any number of things. But you can get a gun. Because apparently a constitutional right is a God-given right, and we kind of think that that's true. So I like to take the founders' original intent, that we are a nation of laws, not men, and that these laws are not handed down from on high. They're actually created by reasoned debate, intellect, and, a few other things that you might assign to the godly. You might, but we're not. So where am I going with this? It's Wednesday, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. There's all these priests everywhere telling us. Okay, no, you can't read that. They're not telling us to do something. They're always telling us not to do something. That's the other part that always astounded me and made me a little bit concerned about where it was all going. Where is this going? Learn to live without. Well, I can understand that to a degree, but when it comes to freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, whatever that might be, I like to think that that's a nice, little path to take. Silly me. So, little kids blasted again, and it's too soon to talk about solutions. Well, apparently we're not able to have any solutions. Not doing it. Not gonna do it. I like how some of these legislators are quick to note that, we homeschool our kids. Really? Yeah. All right. Same ones that say that we're not doing anything. We're not doing anything. And as I've noted many, many times, legislators who believe that government doesn't work are going to work hard to make sure it never does. And they do. They work very hard at it. Whew, man. Okay. Let's take away the safety net. Let's ban books. You can't watch this movie about Ruby Bridges. Yeah, okay. One person out of millions upon millions upon millions upon millions gets to say, well, I don't like that book, or I don't like that poem, I don't like that movie, I don't like that film because it might harm my kid. I don't want it. And I want anyone else to have it either. This is what we're been reduced to. Or some might speculate we are not reduced to it. We've always been in this infantile state. Yeah, well, some of us tried to get at least to adolescence. At least. Okay. Is that ranting? I guess it is. Oh, yesterday I failed to give the update on what's happening here at the mothership, which is also, I guess, the infirmary now, too. Yeah. Well, we took Mom to see a partner in the where our primary is, who happens to be an internal medicine specialist and quite knowledgeable, or bedside manner. He was very thorough. Let's put it that way. And we went through another lab of tests, and he adjusted meds and whatnot. And the oxygen saturation levels were good, actually, when she was on oxygen. When she's off of it, they get pretty bad. And so that's good to know. And it's good to have this oxygen around. She needs it all the time. And, went through another series of lab tests. And we're going to go back in a week for some more. Had to do, as I mentioned, adjusting some of her meds, or diuretic, the furosemide. And she's also taking potassium. And so those actually are, the potassium is close, but it needs to be better. And as he stated, she might be dried out a little bit too much. So don't want to have that either. And the reason we mention this is because this whole incident is because of congestive heart failure, which we all know is, water accumulating in the lungs and elsewhere. So she's not bloating. That's good. But the poor lady, she's a fighter and she's struggling. And when we get these meds balanced out, it will really help her cognition as well, as the doctor stated. But already the oxygen has helped tremendously in terms of her engagement, as I've mentioned. And so, yeah, that's good. I'm glad she's on it. Eek. But such is life. And if you are patient enough with me as I go through all of this, I appreciate that. So thank you. All right. What do we have in store for you here today as we begin this salon that we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy in the Bistro Cafe part, because there's this little secret chef's table out there in the Speakeasy part. We're in the Bistro Cafe right now. And what did we have in store with you at the very top? Well, yeah, that was Ali Velshi discussing with a former PM of Israel, we all know him, about the concern for the health of Israel's democracy has sparked alarm at all levels, everywhere. Then on the rest of the menu, a right-wing think tank tied to deep right-wing dark money, say that really fast, has jumped into the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. Yeah, that's a very important one. We need to be paying much more attention to it, and we will. Federal authorities offered rewards of up to $20,000 as their search continues for former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan's ex-chief of staff. He's a fugitive from the law. And California farmers are capturing the runoff from a freakishly wet year to replenish the overpumped Central Valley Aquifer. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where French authorities raided the Paris offices of 5 banks on suspicion of tax fraud. Seems to be going around. And a Muslim leader for Scotland is a sign of the United Kingdom's political diversity. We'll see. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. page at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across from that chat room link to the left and just down a skosh is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it really helps. We always say that if you could send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, or I don't know, a couple of scones and a brioche. Yeah, how about that? If you could send those funds instead to us once a month, we're able to pool that together and put a big dent in the monthly bills, let alone the quarterly, yearly, etc. type bills that come in. And we have you to thank for your generosity over quite a few years, like a dozen. And thank you for that generosity, because the founders originally intended that we had a civic duty to fulfill. And we do take that civic duty and the responsibility of such very seriously. And here we are. So once again, thank you for your generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable, you can do so at Netroots Radio at those assigned platforms. Tom takes care of them all. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable. I incidentally post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime, and then try to get that linked up. I certainly do when I post for the podcast diary that I put up later when I get the podcast together. But anyway, the show notes and links are an important integral part to this multimedia operation, and that's where you can find the original reportage in its totality. So do check those show notes and links out. You can also follow the show on Twitter, such as it is, at Cookbook West. Pick up podcasts, as I mentioned, by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, Deezer. I don't know. Wherever podcasts can be found. It's everywhere. Everywhere. All right, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy comes from, I have to open up this little tab here. Oh, yes, it's from the American Independent by Matt Cohen. The Republican State Leadership Committee, a right-wing think tank and political organization, announced last week that it will spend $200,000 in Wisconsin in support of conservative Justice Daniel Kelly's run for the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Conservative is a very nice way of putting how reactionary this guy is. And when I say reactionary, I'm talking, stiff arms and goose steps. The bulk of the money will fund a 17-second television ad. Boy, we're in the wrong business. $200,000 almost for 17 seconds? Oh, well. We're trying to do good rather than make money. Silly us. Back to the article at hand. And that ad will air across the state, and that contrasts images related to COVID-19 guidelines, gun violence protests, and police reform protests with headlines about the state Supreme Court striking down COVID-19 restrictions. After asking, what makes Wisconsin great? Where have we heard those sentiments before? The ad's narrator says, we're independent thinkers. We don't let the D.C. outsiders tell us how to live. When the liberal elite try to set aside our rule of law, we stand in their way. Don't California our Wisconsin. Vote Dan Kelly for Wisconsin Supreme Court. And that's where it ends. Aren't they supposed to have like a really fast disclaimer about who's paying for all this? Apparently not. But the RSLC has its own history of political spending and influence in state and judicial elections. The group describes itself as the largest organization of Republican state leaders in the country and the only national committee whose mission is to elect Republicans to multiple down-ballot state-level offices in all 50 states. And that's the Dean's strategy, isn't it? Fulfilling that mission usually comes in the form of what the news outlet Common Dreams calls a dark money bomb, a large influx of last-minute financial support for a candidate, usually in the form of TV and radio ads, mailers, and digital advertising in the days leading up to the election. The Judicial Fairness Initiative, a project of the RSLC that targets state judicial elections, has spent just over $150,000 on mailers and digital advertising to help Kelly's current campaign, according to the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, a nonpartisan watchdog group that tracks state political spending. The RSLC is seen by experts on campaign finance as a dark money machine. In the 2020 election cycle, the top donors were the Judicial Crisis Network and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, two major right-wing organizations thanks to their 501c4 tax status that can give them an unlimited amount of money to groups like the RSLC, and they don't have to disclose their financial contributors. If you have to hide, what are you trying to hide? Associated Press staff bring us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Federal authorities offered rewards of up to $20,000 as their search continues for former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan's ex-chief of staff 2 weeks after he failed to appear for trial on corruption charges. Roy McGrath, age 53, was declared a wanted fugitive after his disappearance, and yesterday, Tuesday, the FBI said McGrath is considered an international flight risk. The FBI's wanted poster lists several aliases for McGrath, including Roy Baseledou and R.C. McGrath, and notes that he is a U.S. citizen born in Greece with ties to Florida. The FBI and U.S. Marshal Service are offering $10,000 each for information leading to McGrath's arrest. After McGrath failed to appear at Baltimore's federal courthouse on March 13th, Attorney Joseph Murta said he believed McGrath, who had moved to Naples, Florida, was planning to fly to Maryland the night before. Instead of beginning jury selection, a judge issued an arrest warrant for McGrath and dismissed the prospective jurors. I have not a clue. I did not see this coming, Murtha said days later. This behavior is so out of the ordinary for him. Obviously, his personal safety is a concern. McGrath was indicted on a 2021 federal fraud charge, accused of securing $233,648 in severance payment, equal to 1 year of salary as the head of Maryland Environmental Service. He also faces fraud and embezzlement charges connected to roughly $170,000 in expenses. McGrath has pleaded not guilty. He resigned just 11 weeks into the job as Hogan's chief of staff in 2020 after the payments became public. According to federal and state prosecutors, McGrath personally enriched himself by taking advantage of his positions of trust as the environmental agency's director and Hogan's top aide. He got the agency's board to approve paying him a $233,647 severance payment, equal to 1 year's salary, upon his departure as executive director, by falsely telling them the governor had already approved the payment, according to prosecutors. If convicted of the federal charges, McGrath faces a maximum sentence of 20 years in federal prison for each of 4 counts of wire fraud and a maximum of 10 years in federal prison for each of 2 counts of embezzling funds from an organization receiving more than $10,000 in federal benefits. Of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A field that has long grown tomatoes, peppers, and onions now looks like a wind-whipped ocean as farmer Dan Cameron seeks to capture the runoff from a freakishly wet year in California to replenish the groundwater basin that is his only source to water his crops. Taking some tomatoes out of production for a year is an easy choice if it means boosting future water supplies for his farm, which is 35 miles southwest of Fresno. He's pumping about 300 acre-feet a day, enough to supply hundreds of households for a year from the gushing North Fork of the Kings River onto former vegetable fields, and others dotted with pistachio trees which can withstand heavy flooding. We knew long-term if we didn't have water, we'd be out of business, Cameron said. We're doing our part to protect communities downstream, but we're also putting the water in the ground. The 70-year-old has spent more than a decade building and expanding a system to divert floodwaters from nearby rural communities and is a pioneer in the practice of on-farm recharge, or flooding agricultural lands during rainy periods to help restore the groundwater basin. But he is not alone. Government agencies, water district officials, and nonprofits are eyeing the practice as a way to weather swings in climate, especially as California muddles through a winter that has experts forecasting the Sierra Nevada snowpack could last for months. Groundwater supplies are essential to both farms and communities across the fertile Central Valley, a key source of food for the United States and beyond. That's even more the case during drought years, when groundwater accounts for up to 60% of the state's water supply, compared with 40% in non-drought, said Wade Crowfoot, Secretary of California's Natural Resources Agency. But farmers have pumped ever deeper through the years of drought, depleting what's left and leaving wells dry. Hoping to reverse that trend, valley water agencies have built basins to try to capture water in rainy years and allow it to seep back into the ground. Now many are hoping to enlist vast tracts of farmland for a similar purpose. Groundwater recharge projects are a critical, important part of our infrastructure future, Crowfoot said. The Tulare Irrigation District, for example, has doubled the amount of water it can divert this year thanks to farmers who are willing to take it, said Daniel Mountjoy, Director of Resource Stewardship at the nonprofit Sustainable Conservation, which supports expanding on-farm recharge. The farmlands are the thing you can expand to when you have a freak year like this, he said. They are the solution. The idea of using farmland to recharge groundwater has percolated for years after California enacted a law in 2014 requiring regional agencies to manage their aquifers and to manage them sustainably to avoid overpumping. More farmers faced with the prospect of fallowing fields began considering it. With the potential for flooding in small towns and rural communities this season, Governor Gavin Newsom signed an order this month making it easier for farmers to divert floodwater to their fields. While some farmers like Cameron are ready to flood their fields now, many others are not. Still, the rains and looming pumping limits have galvanized interest, said Wendy Rash, State Water Quality Specialist at the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service. Last year, her agency started a pilot program for 20 farmers, and more than 24 in Fresno County alone recently were on call about how to join the expanding effort in its second year. If successful, the program could be replicated in other western states. Well, that's some good news, and it is now time to go to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and do we have it? And we'll finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Now We Take Manhattan. There's an arc to franchises like the Scream series. Legendary director Wes Craven, who hasn't been involved in the last couple, set out in 1996 to make a genuinely scary slasher flick, but an aware one with a crisp script and some genre self-deprecation that gave it real comic bite. Of course, slasher films weren't new 27 years ago either, and the original Scream stood out. As such franchises go on, though, we see the arc of attention mission creep into satisfying a market for devotees' interest in the characters, which can be okay if the characters are compelling and nuanced, then eventually into servicing iconic features of the earlier movies. It would seem that with Scream 6, the arc is complete. Not that there aren't going to be more of them. We have many of the non-previously killed-off characters returning, with updated backstories. How interesting they are is likely subjective, based on how into the series you are. The core four, as they call themselves, certainly check off boxes for diversity, which may or may not be connected to the venue change from Woodsboro to what's supposed to be New York City, though I suspect that's more something from a list of how can we make this look different this time, sort of like putting a shotgun in the Ghostface's hands. Back are snippets from the old slasher horror pics, a wonderful self-deprecating monologue, this time from Mindy, about the mechanics of the franchise, which might contain a key to solving the mystery, though it could be confused with the business model. But the ultimate mature franchise sign here is the venue for the blood-spattered finale, a derelict movie theater fixed up as a shrine to the earlier Ghostfaces. If you've been following along since the beginning, Scream 6 is for you. Otherwise, well, this has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Science Quickly, a podcast from Scientific American. I'm Stefano Montali. If I asked you to visualize, say, Harry Potter, you'd probably have no problem picturing him in your mind. A teenage wizard with black hair, glasses, a thunderbolt-shaped scar on his forehead, and a wand in his hand. It would almost be as if you were pulling up a photograph in your head. This ability to visualize is often called the mind's eye, and most people would say it's as inherent as breathing. But it turns out that's not quite true. Estimates say about 1% of the population live with an extreme form of a condition called aphantasia. Those who have it can't visualize anything in their head.
So when they try and imagine, think about what an apple looks like, it's just nothing. It's black on black. For example, when I think about an apple, I can capture a conscious experience of an apple. I can see the stem, I can see a leaf, I can see a drop of water on there. It's not like holding an apple in my hand, but I have an experience of an apple.
Joel Pearson is a professor of cognitive neuroscience and director of the Future Minds Lab at the University of New South Wales in Australia. He's been studying mental imagery, including in the context of aphantasia and cognition, since 2008. One of the main questions, he says, has always been finding a way to accurately measure it.
Back then, almost no one, there was only a few people studying visual imagery because it was so hard to measure, right? It was just questionnaires and maybe an interview. The problem with questionnaires is that you and me could both imagine an apple and our imagery could be exactly the same, but I might rate it a 4 and you might rate it a 1, right? Even though we consciously, internally experience the exact same thing, or vice versa. Maybe we have totally different imagery and both rate it as 2. So that's kind of the inherent problem of metacognition when it comes to questionnaires. So a lot of what we do at Future Minds Lab is trying to develop new ways of measuring the mind, objective, reliable ways, like a microscope for the mind or a blood test to measure the mind.
One of the lab's experiments explored how a lack of mental imagery affects the way people with aphantasia respond in a hypothetical stressful situation.
We did another experiment, which was having people come into a dark room and read these scary stories on the screen. We found that people with imagery, when we measure their skin conductance response, get this nice escalating response during the story. Those with aphantasia get sort of a flatlining, bumpy. Whereas if we show both those group scary images on the screen, both groups go up. So when it's perceptual, no real difference. When it's words on the screen, a role for mental imagery, there's a clear difference.
Building on this research, Pearson and his team then recruited people with aphantasia from the Sydney, Australia area to come to the lab for another experiment. This time, he asked the participants to imagine a dark object and then a light one.
Your pupil contracts when you're imagining the bright thing, just like it does if I look up at the light. People with imagery, the pupil is different in the light condition. No imagery with aphantasia, there's no real difference there.
For a person to be able to volunteer for this type of experiment, they first have to realize that they have aphantasia. But how do you know that you can't visualize if you don't even know that other people can? Quite often, Pearson says the epiphany takes place in a meditation class.
The teacher will be saying, now picture this and picture that, and I'll be getting more and more frustrated saying, they keep saying that, what do they mean? I can't picture that. I compare it to people discovering they're colorblind. They just don't know what they're missing until someone describes somehow the vivid experience of color. Then they go, oh, wait, what?
On a brighter note, though, there are many successful creative people that live with the condition. Pixar co-founder Ed Catmull is one. Glenn Keane, a character animator behind films such as The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, is another. So is there a connection between imagery, aphantasia, and creativity?
I had lots of emails from people saying, oh my God, I've realized I have aphantasia. That's why I'm not creative. In fact, we're running a creativity study now here in Future Minds. And again, the data does not support any difference in creativity measures for those with aphantasia. So even though people tend to sort of have some intuition, they think that there should be a lack of creativity in aphantasia, the data just doesn't support that so far.
Living without mental imagery might seem like a disadvantage. But Pearson says there are benefits as well, especially in terms of those living with anxiety disorders such as post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD.
All the data we have so far suggests that the more vivid your imagery is, the more prone you are to develop PTSD after a trauma. Things around anxiety are going to be different and less without imagery.
But what about good memories? Do they stick around? Pearson says yes, just in a bit of a different way.
That can take on a number of different semantics, ideas, concepts, spatial locations, emotions, and sometimes different senses. You can break aphantasia up into multisensory aphantasia, so it's blind across all the senses, or pure visual aphantasia. So why people's lifelong memories have less details if they have aphantasia, they're still there. It's not catastrophic. The memories aren't lost.
Thanks for listening. For Scientific Americans, Science Quickly, I'm Stefano Montali.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting. A teenager. Learning the lingo.
Today I'm going to help parents translate teen slang. Now, when a teen says something is on fleek, it's exactly like saying, that's rad. It simply means that something is awesome or cool. Another one is totes. It's exactly like saying, totally, just shorter. As in, I totes love going to the mall with Becca. Another word you might hear is jelly. Jelly is a shorter, better way to say jealous. As in, Chloe, I am like so jelly of your unicorn phone case.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will think you're, rad, just the same. To learn more, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
It's always useful in a moment of national urgency to have level-headed experts explain what's happening. Experts like extremist right-wing politicos. For example, when two high-flying banks crashed this month, these screechers flocked to blame it all on their latest ideological bugaboo, wokeness. Their loopy contention is that everything bad in our country is happening because such institutions as schools, libraries, corporations, and even banks are responding to America's long history of systemic inequality by pursuing politically correct policies, promoting liberal values like fairness, equality, and diversity. Hello, oppression of the many by the few is in fact a reality in America. 2, pursuit of those liberal values is what makes America historically important. And banks? You're seriously asserting that high finance is now motivated by a liberal share-the-wealth mentality? Yes, indeed, squawk these self-proclaimed knowledgeable ones, singling out the recently failed Silicon Valley Bank. They were among the most woke banks, moaned a GOP lawmaker who specializes in conspiracy theories. Governor Ron DeSantis piled on, barking that this bank, they're so concerned with diversity and all kinds of stuff. Then Donald Trump offered his usual deep assessment, lecturing that the collapse is, quote, what happens when you push leftist woke ideology. Bovine excrement. As has now been documented, these banks were not woke, but greedy, incompetent, and reckless. Worse, our bank regulators had been intentionally put to sleep by a 2018 law that specifically let such banks escape careful public supervision. Guess what? Trump was the one who initiated this disastrous regulatory exemption. Ron DeSantis cheered and voted for it, and the CEO of Silicon Valley Bank led the lobbying campaign to ram it into law. This is Jim Hightower saying, these politicos and profiteers crashed the bank, and now they're trying to put us to sleep with their hokey, anti-woke PR stunt. Howdy-ho, folks, and thanks for tuning in to my Hightower radio commentaries. And guess what? There's even more Hightower waiting for you online. Subscribers to my Substack newsletter, Jim Hightower's Lowdown, get commentaries, articles, interviews with progressive sparklies, live events, historical nuggets, and more. Go to jimhightower.substack.com to sign up, and you'll get more. That's jimhightower.substack.com.
I'm Rick Smith.
and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1948. That was the day that the labor movement came literally to the doorstep of Wall Street. The United Financial Employees Union went out on strike. The union was started in 1941 by Merritt David Keefe, a page who had worked on the stock exchange trading floor. Keefe had grown up too poor to finish high school. He had gone to Wall Street in the hope of finding wealth and financial security. Instead, he found long hours and low-paying work. He decided the only way to change things was to form a union. By 1946, the union had grown to 5,000 members. Keefe described their platform, calling for a general overall minimum increase of 25% in the salaries of Wall Street employees, job security, benefits of a pension fund, and, in addition, a bonus computed on the volume of trading. Negotiations drug on. Finally, 1,100 union members walked out on strike against both the New York Stock Exchange and the New York Curb Exchange. 500 members of the Seafarers Union supported the exchange workers' cause. The first day of the strike was peaceful, but the next morning, the police told the strikers they could not picket the main entrance of the stock exchange. One 19-year-old woman refused to go across the street. The police reacted by grabbing her and arresting her. Outraged, the picketers rushed to her aid. Some attempted to lie down in the entrance to block the exchange. The police wielded batons, hospitalizing 2 strikers and arresting more than 40. Sadly, the strike ended in defeat in April, as 100 workers lost their jobs because of their involvement. The workers had lost the Battle of Wall Street, the first and only strike at the exchange. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 33 degrees Fahrenheit under foggy conditions, expected to be a tad warmer today than it was yesterday. Partial cloudiness a little later on with scattered showers and thunderstorms during the late morning and through the afternoon and into the evening. Winds will be out of the north at 5 to 10 miles per hour, highs around 55. And that's why we're going to get some thunderstorms, I suppose. A few clouds overnight with lows 33 to 35, winds light and variable. Then mostly cloudy skies early tomorrow, then partly cloudy in the afternoon with highs again around 55 with winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And then expecting more rain tomorrow night. Pollen remains rated as none. I wonder if there's something wrong with the gauge, because here in the little town of Rogue River, there's something floating around. Anyway, the air quality index for the region is in the good range at 29 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is moderate, though it has ticked up a couple of clicks to level 5. Barometric pressure is rising at 29.85 inches. Visibility is 0.06 miles. And relative humidity is at 98%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. And of course, we know that is the Weather Underground. London is 57 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 70 degrees and sunny. Rome is 62 and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 35 degrees and cloudy. Kabul is 46 with a light rain. Hong Kong is 70 degrees and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 52 and rain. Sydney, Australia is 63 and clear. San Francisco, California is 47 degrees with rain and a small craft advisory on the bay and offshore. And New York, New York is 48 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Staff at the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Authorities raided the Paris offices of 5 banks yesterday, Tuesday, on suspicion of tax fraud, French prosecutors said. The raids come as part of 5 preliminary investigations that were opened in December of 2021 on allegations of money laundering and tax fraud linked to dividend payments, the French National Financial Prosecutor's Office said in a statement. Prosecutors did not specify which banks were raided, but French media said the banks searched included HSBC, BNP Paribas Exane, a subsidiary of BNP, and Societe Generale and Natixis. Societe Generale confirmed the investigation at its office, but declined to comment further. Messages seeking comment from the other banks were not immediately returned. The raid comes amid global financial turmoil unleashed this month by the collapse of 2 U.S. banks and the government-orchestrated takeover of troubled Swiss lender Credit Suisse by its rival UBS. The French investigation involved cum deals in which a foreign shareholder of a company listed in France transferred its shares to a French bank around the time that dividends are paid out to avoid paying capital gains tax. I guess that's cum. The French prosecutor's statement says the search involved 6 German prosecutors from Cologne in the framework of European judicial cooperation. It suggests that foreign shareholders in question included Germans or German entities. The Cologne prosecutor's office said it cannot comment on the investigation because press sovereignty in this case lies with the French investigative authorities. A similar wide-ranging tax evasion investigation in neighboring Germany in recent years led to searches of banks, other companies, and the homes of business people, leading to convictions against some bankers. The hundreds of bankers allegedly were involved in that fraud, involving cum-ex transactions in which participants swapped shares to collect reimbursement for taxes they had not paid. The scam reportedly defrauded taxpayers of billions of euros.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Jill Lawless of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Humza Yousaf was confirmed as First Minister of Scotland yesterday, Tuesday, becoming the first person of colour to head the Scottish government and the first Muslim national leader in any Western democracy. The milestone comes 5 months after the UK got its first Hindu leader and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Britain's capital city is headed by London Mayor Sadiq Khan, the son of Pakistani immigrants. All three politicians reflect the accelerating diversification of politics in Britain, a country whose imperialist past has uncertainly and sometimes painfully forged a multi-ethnic present. There's an expectation now, or familiarity with diversity in British politics, that we don't see in other European countries, said Sundar Katwala of British Future, a think tank that studies identity and race. Lawmakers in the Edinburgh-based Scottish Parliament voted on Tuesday to confirm 37-year-old Youssef as First Minister, a day after he was elected leader of the governing Scottish National Party. Scotland, a country of 5.5 million people, is part of the United Kingdom, but as a semi-autonomous government with broad power in areas including health and education. And that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.